Section 7. Analysis of Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City. A. Introduction. After the Warren Commission published its report, two very important allegations related to Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City came to the attention of the United States investigative agencies. In 1964, Elena Garro de Paz reported that she had seen Lee Harvey Oswald, accompanied by two other men, at a party at the home of Ruben Duran Navarro, the brother-in-law of Sylvia Duran. In 1967, Oscar Contreras Lartigue reported that he met Lee Harvey Oswald on the campus of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. In addition, the testimony of the Warren Commission's primary witness related to Mexico City, Sylvia Tirado Duran, has been called into question by the critics throughout the years. Some of the information that is inconsistent with Ms. Duran's original story, that Oswald visited the consulate on 2 occasions, which were the only times she saw him, was available at the time of the Warren Commission's inquiry, although it was ignored. Some of the information has developed after the publication of the Warren Report. The Garro and Contreras allegations, in conjunction with the inconsistencies of Ms. Duran's story, raise 3 major questions. 1. Did Lee Harvey Oswald or an imposter visit the Cuban consulate in Mexico City? 2. Other than his visits to the Cuban consulate, what were Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City? And 3. Was Lee Harvey Oswald traveling alone in Mexico? These 3 questions overlap somewhat in detail. E.g., if Oswald was not traveling alone, did one of his companions impersonate him at the Cuban consulate? Nonetheless, each of the 3 questions will be dealt with in separate sections below. In an attempt to answer these questions, the House Select Committee on Assassinations has 1. Interviewed Mexican and Cuban citizens who could have knowledge of Oswald's visits to the Cuban consulate. 2. Interviewed Mexican citizens who could have knowledge of Oswald's activities and associations in Mexico City. 3. Conducted an extensive review of the files of the Central Intelligence Agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigation that pertain to Oswald's sojourn in Mexico City. B. Did Lee Harvey Oswald or an imposter contact the Cuban and Soviet consulates in Mexico City? Lee Harvey Oswald himself probably visited the Cuban consulate at least once, since his application for a Cuban in-transit visa bears his signature. Footnote: the handwriting panel concluded that the signature on the visa application was identical to other samples of Lee Harvey Oswald's handwriting. End footnote. Though the Cuban consulate allowed visa applicants to take blank applications out of the consulate to be returned when completed, Sylvia Duran stated she was certain that Oswald signed the application in her presence. Footnote: HSCA interview of Sylvia Duran, June 6, 1978, JFK document 011775. Consul Askew stated that standard operating procedure at the Cuban consulate did not allow applications to be removed from the office. HSCA public testimony of Eusebio Askew, September 18, 1978, page 41. End footnote. Oswald's signature on the Cuban visa application, however, does not by itself rule out the possibility that someone impersonated Oswald in contacts with the Cuban and Soviet embassies. An analysis of the telephone conversations which the CIA's Mexico City station intercepted by tapping the Soviet consulate and the Soviet military attaché's telephone reveals that someone, later identified by the CIA as Oswald, visited the Cuban consulate at least 2 times and the Soviet consulate at least 3 times. On September 27, 1963, at 4:05 p.m., Sylvia Duran called the Soviet consulate. In this conversation, she referred to an American seeking an in-transit visa to Cuba. The substantive information given indicates that she was discussing Oswald. At this time, the individual using Oswald's name already had been at the Soviet embassy at least once, since Sylvia requested the name of the Soviet embassy official who dealt with the American. Sylvia also stated that the American was, at that time, in the Cuban consulate. At 4:26 p.m., a Soviet consular official returned Sylvia Duran's call. This official stated specifically that Oswald had visited the Soviet consulate. On September 28, 1963, at 11:51 a.m., Sylvia Duran called the Soviet consulate. She put the American, later identified as Oswald, on the telephone. The American, who was at the Cuban consulate at the time, said that he had just been at the Soviet consulate. The conversation ended with the American stating that he was returning to the Soviet consulate. Analysis of Sylvia Duran's and Eusebio Azcu's testimony would tend to indicate that Oswald, or someone impersonating him, visited the Cuban consulate at least one and possibly two additional times on September 27, 1963. Sylvia Duran says that Oswald first visited the Cuban consulate at approximately 11 a.m., requesting an in-transit visa to Cuba with Russia as the final destination. Ms. Duran sent Oswald to obtain photographs that he needed for the visa application. Eusebio Azcu recalls that this visit probably occurred on the date on the visa application, September 27, 1963. Ms. Duran also stated that Oswald returned at approximately 1 p.m. with 4 photographs. Eusebio Azcu also stated that the individual later identified as Oswald returned to the Cuban consulate about 1 p.m. with the photographs probably on the date that appears on the application, that is to say, on the 27th. The committee believes that there is a possibility that the argument between Azcu and the individual occurred during this visit. Ms. Duran stated that Oswald's third and last visit occurred in the late afternoon after working hours on the 27th. This visit is confirmed by the CIA's tap on the Soviet consulate. In addition to the alleged Oswald visits to the consulates, there were other telephonic contacts that may have been between Oswald or an impersonator and the consulates. Several details about Oswald's visits to the Cuban consulate and telephonic contacts with both consulates suggest that the individual involved may not have been Oswald. Sylvia Duran's description of Oswald did not resemble Oswald's true physical appearance. This description, which appeared early in the reporting of information obtained from Ms. Duran, was deleted from subsequent reports and was not at all mentioned in the Warren Report. See Section V.C. for details. Eusebio Azcu's description of Oswald was similar to Sylvia Duran's, but more detailed. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about these descriptions is their similarity to Elena Guerra de Paz's description of one of Oswald's alleged companions. Another possible indication that an impostor may also have visited the consulate is the September 28, 1963 intercepted conversation. Sylvia Duran adamantly denies that Oswald or any other American visited the Cuban consulate on Saturday, September 28, 1963. In light of the CIA intercept of that date, Ms. Duran has either lied to the committee or the individual who visited the consulate on September 28th was not Oswald. Footnote: the CIA's classification of the transcript of this conversation prevented the HSCA from directly confronting Ms. Duran with the information. End footnote. Ms. Duran, in light of the inconsistencies detailed in sections 5C and 6A above, may not be the most credible witness, but there are indications that she was truthful when she stated that Oswald did not visit the consulate on September 28th. The September 28, 1963 conversation was linked to Oswald because of the marginal notations made by the CIA translator on the transcript. The translator noted on the transcript that the caller spoke terrible, hardly recognizable Russian. On October 1, 1963, a man called the Soviet consulate and identified himself as Lee Oswald. This man also stated that he had been at the consulate on Saturday the 28th. The translator noted that this was the same man who had called the consulate a day or so ago and had spoken in broken Russian. From this information, and possibly a voice comparison, the September 28th caller was identified as Oswald. The problem with assuming that the caller on September 28th and October 1st was Oswald is that Oswald spoke fluent Russian. Granted, Ms. Duran's denial of the Saturday visit and the proficiency of the caller's Russian is not sufficient evidence to conclude that the person who visited the Cuban consulate on Saturday and who called the Soviet consulate on Saturday and on October 1st was an imposter. Yet the information is sufficient to question the assumption that it was Oswald, especially in light of Ascue's and Duran's descriptions and Elena Garro de Paz's allegation. The committee notes the possibility, but does not conclude that the missing production from the pulse camera and the LI Lyric bass has something to do with the possibility that someone impersonated Oswald in Mexico. 3 calls that also occurred early on September 27, 1963, may have been by an imposter. At approximately 10:30 a.m., a man called the Soviet military attaché looking for a visa to Odessa and was referred to the Soviet consulate. At 10:37 a.m., a man called the Soviet consulate and asked for a visa to Odessa. He was told to call back at 11 o'clock. At 1:25 p.m., a man called the Soviet embassy and was told the consul would return between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. that day. While only the caller's requests for a visa to Russia, Odessa, connect these calls to Oswald, the HSCA believes that they do fit logically into a time sequence created by what is known from testimony and the electronic intercepts about his actions on that day. For example, the following is a reasonable possible chronology of Oswald's actions on September 27, 1963, based on analysis of the available evidence. Oswald probably arrived in Mexico around 10 a.m. on September 27th. By 10:30, Oswald had time to arrive at the Hotel del Comercio and to place a call to the Soviet military attaché who referred him to the consul. The military attaché also gave the caller directions to the consulate. During the 10:37 a.m. call to the consulate, the caller learned that he could contact the Soviet consul at 11 a.m. This done, Oswald then visited the Cuban consulate, where he arrived around 11 a.m. on his way to the Soviet consulate. This meeting lasted only approximately 15 minutes. Oswald was then sent to obtain photographs and to the Russian embassy to get the necessary Russian visa. Oswald returned to the Cuban consulate around 1 p.m. At this point, he had his encounter with Ascue and completed his application. Oswald realized at this point that he would have problems obtaining the visas. After this visit to the Cuban consulate, which lasted approximately 15 minutes, Oswald tried to contact the Soviet consul, whom Oswald claimed had assured him that he would have no problems obtaining a visa. Hence, the 1:25 call. During this conversation, Oswald learned that the consul would be in that evening between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Oswald returned to the Cuban consulate at 4, and Sylvia Duran called the Soviet consul on his behalf. Hence the 4:05 and 4:25 p.m. calls involving Duran. But there is a problem with attributing the first 3 calls on September 27, 1963 to Oswald. The conversations are all in Spanish. With the exception of the testimony of Delgado, the evidence indicates that Oswald did not speak Spanish. Hence, either the above detailed calls were not made by Oswald, or Oswald could speak Spanish. There is not enough evidence firmly to conclude that someone did impersonate Oswald in Mexico. On the other hand, the evidence is of such a nature that the possibility cannot be dismissed. C. What were Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City? When the Warren Commission wrote about Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City, it concluded, quote, "The Commission undertook an intensive investigation to determine Oswald's purpose and activities on this journey, with specific reference to reports that Oswald was an agent of the Cuban or Soviet governments. As a result of its investigation, the Commission believes that it has been able to reconstruct and explain most of Oswald's actions during this time." By Saturday, September 28, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald had failed to obtain visas at both the Cuban and Soviet embassies. From Sunday, September 29th, through Wednesday morning, October 2nd, when he left Mexico City on a bus bound for the United States, Oswald spent considerable time making his travel arrangements, sightseeing, and checking again with the Soviet embassy to learn whether anything had happened on his visa application. End quote. Subsequent to the Warren Commission's report, the allegations of Elena Garro and Oscar Contreras Lartigue came to the attention of the United States investigative agencies. The main allegation of both these people, that they met Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City, remains to this day without direct corroboration. Yet the committee feels that it cannot dismiss these allegations without giving them any consideration. The testimony of Sylvia Duran and the Cuban consulate officials Askew and Mirabal place Oswald's last contact with the Cuban embassy on Friday evening, September 27, 1963. The transcripts from the CIA's wiretaps on the Soviet consulate place Oswald's last visits to the Soviet and Cuban consulates on Saturday morning, September 28, 1963. Oswald's last telephonic contact with the Soviet consulate came on Tuesday, October 1, 1963. Oswald's activities on the days between September 28th and October 1st are not clearly recorded. The Warren Commission speculated that he spent most of this time sightseeing and making travel arrangements. It is entirely possible that Oswald did spend some of his time during this weekend sightseeing and making his travel arrangements. It is also entirely possible that after his failure to obtain his visas on Saturday, September 28th, that Oswald did not give up completely and did attend the party where he would have come into contact with the Cuban consular officials and later sought help from pro-Castro students. It is entirely possible that Ruben Duran had a twist party on September 30th or October 1st, as Elena Garro has claimed. Ruben, Horatio, Lydia, and Sylvia Duran all admitted that they frequently had twist parties in 1963. Only Sylvia Duran recalled Elena Garro attending any of the twist parties at the Duran's home. She recalled Elena and Elena's daughter, Elenita, attending one twist party at Ruben's home in 1963. The other Durans adamantly denied that Lee Harvey Oswald had attended a twist party at one of their homes. Many of the details of Elena Garros' allegations have not been or cannot be corroborated. For example, Elena's allegation that some of the people who had been at the party were taken to Veracruz under the protection of Governor Lopez Arias has not been verified. Ruben Duran denied that he had ever discussed the assassination with Elena Garro. Eusebio Askew denied that he had discussed President Kennedy with Emilio Carballido at a party at the Duran's home, as alleged by Elena Garro. The committee has not been able to verify whether or not guards were posted outside of Elena's home in 1963, as she claims. But other details of Elena's story are very credible. Perhaps the most striking is the suggestion that Oswald's relationship with Sylvia Duran was more extensive than just the business contacts in the Cuban consulate. Another detail is the manner in which Elena's allegations were handled and the manner in which this committee's attempts to investigate those allegations have been frustrated. In 1965, Elena Garro reported that Sylvia Duran had been Oswald's mistress while he was in Mexico City. In 1967, this report was confirmed by a CIA agent who talked to Sylvia Duran. The CIA station did not consider the information significant and told the agent to end his contact with Miss Duran. If that information is accurate, then that Sylvia invited Oswald to a party would not have been surprising. Sylvia Duran admitted that the Mexican police had questioned her on this point, but denied that she had had an affair with Oswald. Miss Duran denied having any extramarital affairs while she was married to Horatio Duran. This denial is not consistent with evidence of her reputation at the Cuban consulate. A CIA penetration agent there reported to his case officer that all that would have to be done to recruit Sylvia Duran, whom he referred to by using the Spanish word for whore, would be to get a blonde, blue-eyed American into bed with her. There is also CIA information that indicates that Sylvia Duran had an affair with a Cuban ambassador to Mexico in the early 1960s. The HSCA attempted to interview the CIA penetration agent about Miss Duran. An interview with the agent was also desired so as to attempt to verify whether Elena Garro had created a disturbance at the Cuban embassy on November 23, 1963. The committee's attempts to interview this agent were frustrated. Ms. Garro's claim that she stayed at the Hotel Vermont was verified by the Mexico City legal attaché on October 13th, 1966. Ms. Garro claimed that she had been held there by Manuel Calvillo, whom she believed worked for the Mexican Ministry of Government. In 1963, Mr. Calvillo was an unwitting asset of the Central Intelligence Agency. Ms. Garro claimed that she told Mr. Calvillo her story on November 23, 1963. Yet the CIA Mexico City station did not receive a report from Calvillo on this matter until November 24, 1964, the same day that Elena first told her story to American officials. For these reasons, it was felt that Manuel Calvillo could well be a key to determining the veracity of Ms. Garros' story. The committee's attempts to interview Mr. Calvillo were also frustrated. There is also circumstantial corroboration of Ms. Garros' allegations regarding June Cobb Sharp. For example, Ms. Cobb was indeed a CIA agent, and she did file the first report of Ms. Garros' story. It should be noted that this first report was accurate in its detail in that Ms. Garros' story remained essentially the same in subsequent repetitions. Ms. Garro claimed that she kicked Ms. Cobb out of her house. There is a notation on Ms. Cobb's report that she was not able to regain access to Ms. Garro. The committee attempted to obtain an interview with Ms. Cobb, but was once again frustrated. Reviewing the manner in which the CIA Mexico City station and the legal attaché's office in Mexico City handled Ms. Garros' allegations reveals that, at best, her allegations were handled in an irresponsible manner because they were dismissed after a superficial investigation. The first report that came to the CIA was misfiled and forgotten. The legat, after talking to Elena, dismissed her story after interviewing one person whom she said may have been at the party. The manner in which the official American community handled Charles Thomas's reporting is detailed in Section 6C11 above. Mr. Thomas speculated in 1969 about why Ms. Garros' story had been largely ignored by the American officials in Mexico. Quote, "It would appear that whereas the FBI has discounted the Elena Garro allegations, the CIA is still considerably disturbed by them. The CIA may not have pressed for further investigation, however, for a number of reasons. One, considering the sensitive overlap and subtle competition between two intelligence collecting agencies, it had to yield to the FBI's clear jurisdiction. Two, there are obvious complications in conducting such an investigation in a foreign country. 3, redacted. And 4, some of the people appearing in the Elena Garro scenario may well be agents of the CIA. Under the circumstances, it is unlikely that any further investigation of this matter will ever take place unless it is ordered by a high official in Washington." End quote. The committee attempted to locate Elena Garro. Although the committee established telephonic contact with Ms. Garro, the committee was totally frustrated in this aspect of its investigation, but yet believes that there is a possibility that Lee Harvey Oswald did attend a twist party at the home of Ruben Duran. The committee also considers it possible that Lee Harvey Oswald contacted pro-Castro students at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, hereinafter UNAM, as claimed by Oscar Contreras Lartigue. Sylvia Duran admitted that she had told Oswald of 2 ways in which he could get a Cuban visa. 1, he could get an in-transit visa by first obtaining a visa to another communist country such as Russia. 2, he could obtain a regular Cuban visa by knowing someone in Cuba who would vouch for him. It is possible that after Oswald's attempts to obtain a visa by the first method were frustrated on Saturday, September 28th, that he made one final effort to locate someone trusted by the Cuban consulate to vouch for him. There is no direct evidence about how Oswald could have learned of the pro-Castro group at UNAM. There is a possibility that Ernesto Lefeld Miller, a friend of the Durans who borrowed Horatio's car often, took Lee Harvey Oswald to the campus of the National Autonomous University. On the days when Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly visited the consulate, Mr. Miller did also. It is possible that Sylvia Duran asked him to escort Oswald to the campus. Mr. Miller denied having ever met Oswald. Oscar Contreras says that Oswald first contacted him as he was leaving a round-table discussion at the School of Philosophy. It is known that in 1963, the Durans were close friends with the chairman of the philosophy department at UNAM, Ricardo Guerra, who held seminars on Kant, Hegel, and Marx in the Durans' home. It is possible, if Sylvia Duran had more than just a purely business relationship with Oswald, that she referred Oswald to one of Guerra's Marxist seminars in his search for help. Unfortunately, Contreras does not name who headed the roundtable discussion at which he met Oswald. Sylvia Duran denied that she referred Oswald to anyone for help. Ricardo Guerra is presently the Mexican ambassador to East Germany and was not available to the committee for an interview. On both of the committee's trips to Mexico, the Mexican government told the committee that Mr. Contreras would be made available for an interview. The interview never occurred. Although the committee's attempt to investigate Mr. Contreras' allegation met largely with frustration, the allegation cannot be dismissed.
D. Was Lee Harvey Oswald alone while he traveled to Mexico? The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald traveled alone while he was in Mexico. All of the witnesses, with the exception of Elena Garro de Paz, who stated that Oswald was accompanied by two beatnik-looking boys at Ruben Duran's party, have stated that when they saw Oswald in Mexico, he was alone. Although the American authorities did not handle the Elena Garro allegation properly, the committee does not believe that it can readily dismiss Ms. Garro's allegation that Oswald had a companion in Mexico in light of 1. The corroboration of details of Ms. Garro's story, 2. The possibility that someone impersonated Oswald in Mexico, and 3. The similarity in the description of Oswald by Miss Duran and Mr. Askew and the description of Oswald's companion by Miss Garro.